Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive with me. Today we're going to explore the life and legacy of Birsa Munda.
Oh, fascinating choice. He's a figure who still resonates deeply across India, especially among the tribal communities.
Exactly, and what's really captivating about Birsa Munda is that his story goes beyond just one man's fight against colonialism.
Yeah, it really gives us this incredible window into the lives of indigenous people in India, their relationship with the land, and the forces that were trying to control both.
He was a tribal freedom fighter, challenging British rule in the late 19th century, fighting for the rights of his people.
And for those who may not know, this is in the region that is now Jharkhand in eastern India.
Yeah, and he's still revered as Dharti Abba, meaning Father of the Earth. I think as we delve deeper, you'll see how fitting that title really is.
It's important to understand the context here, right? Birsa Munda emerged during a time of immense change and turmoil in India.
Right. The British were solidifying their control, and their policies often had devastating consequences for indigenous communities.
These were communities who relied heavily on the land, on the forests for their survival, for their entire way of life.
The sources we've looked at really paint a vivid picture of his early life. Born in 1875 in a small village in the Chotanagpur region.
You can imagine, even as a young boar, he would have witnessed firsthand the struggles his people faced under British rule.
Absolutely. I mean, his community, like many others at the time, was dealing with land dispossession, forced labor.
And then there were those really oppressive taxes imposed by the British administration, often with the help of local collaborators.
All of these factors really fuel the anger and the desire for change.
And that's where Birsa Munda steps in. He doesn't just observe these injustices, he becomes a leader, a symbol of resistance.
It's truly remarkable. His charisma, his courage, and his deep understanding of tribal traditions resonated so strongly with people.
And that connection is what earned him the title Dharti Abba.
It signifies a deep spiritual connection to the land, something central to the beliefs of indigenous communities.
Exactly. He embodied that connection, becoming a beacon of hope, a leader who truly understood the profound significance of their land and traditions.
And that leads us to the turning point, the uprising in the 1890s. The sources describe escalating exploitation and a growing sense of resentment among the tribal communities.
And then Birsa Munda issues this powerful call to action, urging his people to end the rule of the queen and establish your own rule on your land.
It's a message that clearly resonated with people yearning for freedom and autonomy.
Absolutely. And what we see from the sources is that his movement initially began by resisting these unfair taxes and restrictions on using the forests.
But it rapidly gained momentum, evolving into a full-blown rebellion against British rule in the Chotanagpur region.
It's fascinating how he managed to ignite such a powerful movement. The sources portray him as this charismatic leader,
Deeply rooted in the spiritual beliefs of his people, even claiming to have divine visions.
which you can imagine only amplified his influence, turning him into an almost mythical figure.
But it's crucial to remember that he wasn't just a spiritual figurehead. He was a brilliant strategist as well.
Right. The rebellion he led wasn't just fueled by passion. There was a strategic element to it. They employed guerrilla warfare tactics to challenge a much stronger enemy.
The sources detail how he and his followers used their knowledge of the dense forest to their advantage, launching surprise attacks and then melting back into the terrain.
Think about that from the perspective of the British troops. They were completely unfamiliar with the terrain, constantly frustrated by these hit-and-run tactics.
It must have been incredibly effective. I mean, they turned their understanding of the environment into a weapon.
It was a brilliant strategy, disrupting British operations, maintaining a level of resistance that really shook the colonial administration.
But it wasn't just about military tactics, right? Birsa Munda's movement had a profound cultural impact as well.
Absolutely. He instilled this sense of pride, a sense of unity among the tribal communities. He reminded them of their rich heritage and urged them to resist assimilation into the colonial system.
His legacy extends far beyond the battlefield.
Now this is where things take a somber turn. Birsa Munda is eventually captured and dies in prison under mysterious circumstances at the young age of 25.
There are still so many unanswered questions and conspiracy theories surrounding his death, which just adds another layer to his already captivating story.
This mysterious end to his life only adds to his status as a folk hero, right? A figure whose life was tragically cut short, but whose impact continues to reverberate even today. You see, for Birsa Munda and his people, the land wasn't just a means of survival, it was sacred. It was a living entity. Dharti Abba, the father of the earth.
That's a powerful point. And speaking of powerful, we need to talk about those guerrilla tactics employed by Birsa Munda and his followers. Let's break that down a bit so everyone really understands what they were doing.
Imagine you're a British soldier, totally unfamiliar with the dense forests of Jharkhand. Suddenly you're ambushed by Birsa Munda's followers, who seem to appear and disappear like phantoms.
Exploiting their knowledge of the terrain to launch these surprise attacks.
That, in essence, is guerrilla warfare. It's about using surprise, using mobility, and intricate knowledge of the environment to fight a larger, more equipped force.
Wow, that paints such a vivid picture. It must have been terrifying for those British troops.
Oh, absolutely, and it highlights Birsa Munda's strategic brilliance.
He wasn't just relying on spiritual strength. He was a smart, adaptable leader who knew exactly how to exploit the weaknesses of his enemy.
This combination of spiritual fervor and tactical brilliance is a huge part of what made him such a successful leader.
And it's this legacy that we'll explore more in the next part of our deep dive. But first, let's take a moment to really consider the profound connection to the land that fueled Birsa Munda's resistance.
It wasn't just a political struggle, it was a spiritual battle for the very soul of his people and their relationship with the earth.
Such a crucial point to remember as we move forward in our exploration.
Absolutely, it's a perspective that enriches our understanding of this entire movement.
Welcome back. So we were talking about this incredible leader, Birsa Munda, and his fight for justice. Even though his life was cut short, his impact didn't end with his death.
Right, even in its suppression, the movement he started forced the British administration to really confront its policies.
And how those policies were impacting indigenous communities.
You see, his fight for tribal land rights, it didn't die with him.
It continued to resonate.
It did. And one of the really interesting things that emerges from the sources is the creation of the Chota Nagpur Tenancy Act in 1908.
Oh, just a few years after Birsa Munda's death.
Exactly. And many historians point to that act as a direct outcome of the uprising he led.
So this act, while limited in scope, offered at least some legal protection for tribal lands.
It was an acknowledgement, in a way, of the wrongs that had been committed.
It's a bit of a bittersweet victory, isn't it? Like he sacrificed so much, and he didn't even live to see this change.
But it does solidify his place as a symbol of resistance.
And as a champion for tribal rights.
And what's really remarkable is how his legacy endures, even today.
I mean, think about it. His fight took place over a century ago.
And yet the issues he struggled against are still so relevant.
Indigenous communities around the world continue to face challenges related to land rights, cultural preservation, and self-determination.
It's a sobering thought.
It really is. We see echoes of Birsa Munda's struggle in movements happening right now.
Fighting for those same things, for tribal rights, for environmental justice.
And for indigenous sovereignty, both in India and globally.
His story serves as this powerful reminder that the pursuit of justice, the pursuit of equality, is an ongoing process.
It's not something that just happened in the past and now it's over.
Exactly, it's a continuous effort.
It's a baton being passed from one generation to the next.
And what I find particularly fascinating is how Birsa Munda's legacy has transcended geographical and cultural boundaries.
He's become this iconic figure, not just in India,
but for oppressed communities worldwide.
a symbol of resistance against injustice.
A reminder that even the most powerful empires can be challenged by the collective will of the people.
It's a testament to the power of one voice, to the impact that one individual can have.
Birsa Munda's story compels us to ask ourselves, what can we learn from his life and his legacy?
Right, how can we apply those lessons to the challenges we face today?
It's a question we should all be grappling with.
Because his story challenges us to examine our own roles in systems that perpetuate inequality.
It urges us to stand in solidarity with those who are fighting for their rights, for their very existence.
It's about understanding the interconnectedness of social justice, environmental protection, and the recognition of indigenous knowledge.
These are not separate issues. They are deeply intertwined.
So it's not just about knowing history, it's about taking action.
Right, it's about amplifying marginalized voices.
And challenging the status quo.
Exactly. Birsa Munda's legacy encourages us to be active participants in the struggle for a just and equitable world.
A world where indigenous communities have the power to shape their own destinies.
And where their voices are not just heard, but genuinely respected.
And that brings us to the present day. How do those struggles that Birsa Munda faced over a century ago connect to the challenges facing indigenous communities in the 21st century?
That's the key question. What can his story teach us about resilience, about resistance, and about the ongoing battle for social and environmental justice?
To answer that question, we need to look at the specific issues that indigenous communities are facing right now.
Issues like land acquisition, displacement, the erosion of cultural traditions.
These are still major concerns.
Absolutely. Development projects, often driven by corporate interests,
They continue to encroach on indigenous lands.
leading to conflict, displacement, and the disruption of entire ways of life.
It's heartbreaking to see these patterns of exploitation repeating themselves.
Despite all the lessons we should have learned from history.
The fight for the recognition of land rights, for the preservation of cultural heritage, for the right to self-determination.
These are not relics of the past.
They are very much alive in the 21st century.
And this is where Birsa Munda's story becomes so incredibly powerful.
It reminds us that these struggles are not isolated incidents.
They are part of a larger historical context.
The colonization, exploitation.
And the marginalization of indigenous peoples.
It's a reminder that the fight for justice is an intergenerational one,
It's a relay race.
where each generation carries the torch forward,
Birsa Munda's legacy serves as a beacon of hope.
reminding us that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds,
Resistance is possible.
but it also poses a challenge to us. What will we do to honor that legacy?
What actions will we take to contribute to a more just and equitable future for indigenous communities?
To truly grasp the significance of Birsa Munda's impact, we have to look at the Chota-Nagpur Tenancy Act.
It wasn't a perfect piece of legislation.
But it did mark a significant shift in how the British administration approached the issue of tribal land rights.
Remember those exploitative taxes and land grabs that we discussed earlier?
Yeah.
This act was a direct attempt to address those issues.
To provide some level of protection for tribal communities.
It recognized their traditional land ownership systems and placed restrictions on the transfer of tribal land to non-tribal people
So it was like trying to erect a legal barrier.
to prevent further exploitation.
But was it truly effective?
Yeah.
Did it actually succeed in protecting tribal lands?
It certainly helped, but like you said, it wasn't a perfect solution.
There were loopholes, right?
Yeah, there were. And there were challenges in implementing it consistently.
Plus, the colonial government still held a great deal of power.
But even with its limitations, the Chota-Nagpur Tenancy Act stands as a testament to Birsa Munda's legacy.
It demonstrates that his struggle, his resistance, forced the British authorities to acknowledge the need for change.
Here offer at least some measure of protection to tribal communities.
And that's a really important point to emphasize. Even though the act wasn't a complete victory,
It was a step in the right direction.
it showed that persistent resistance, even against a powerful empire,
Can achieve tangible legal change.
and it highlights the importance of understanding these legal frameworks.
And advocating for policies that genuinely protect indigenous rights.
Because this is a fight that continues to this very day.
As indigenous communities around the world strive for legal recognition.
And for the protection of their lands and their cultures.
It's a reminder that the legacy of Birsa Munda is still alive.
And that his struggle continues to inspire us in the 21st century. It can feel, I don't know, a little overwhelming at times. Like, where do we even begin to make a difference?
Well, education is always a good starting point, right?
Okay, so what do you mean?
Just learning more about the history, the current realities of indigenous communities.
In our own areas, in our own backyards.
Exactly. And you'd be surprised how often there are local groups already working on these issues.
Oh, that makes sense.
And getting involved with them can have a real impact, even on a small scale.
Right, so it's about taking that knowledge and actually doing something with it.
Exactly. And another way is through supporting indigenous artists,
Their business.
their organizations.
Yeah, making sure their voices are heard, that their perspectives are represented.
Because so often they get pushed aside or ignored. So amplifying those voices through our support, through our choices, can make a real difference.
And it's about listening, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Never underestimate the power of just listening to and learning from indigenous communities directly.
Seeking out their stories, their perspectives, their wisdom.
Being a true ally means being humble and understanding.
So it's not just about acknowledging what happened in the past,
It's about understanding how those struggles continue to play out today.
like with land rights.
Exactly. Birsa Munda fought against land dispossession, and that fight is still happening in many parts of the world.
It's almost like history is repeating itself.
And it's not just about the land itself, it's about what the land represents.
Okay, so what do you mean by that?
For indigenous communities, their land is often intertwined with their identity, their spirituality, their very cultural heritage.
So it's not just a resource to be exploited.
It's a sacred connection to be honored, to be protected.
That's a beautiful way to put it. So how do we, as individuals, become part of the solution?
Well, there are practical steps we can take. We can start by educating ourselves about the issues facing Indigenous communities in our own region and beyond.
Right, doing our own research.
Exactly, and then there are organizations that are already working on land rights, on language revitalization, on cultural preservation, economic development.
And we can support those organizations.
Absolutely, and don't forget about the choices we make as consumers.
Oh yeah, like supporting Indigenous-owned businesses.
Supporting Indigenous artists.
Making conscious decisions about where we spend our money.
Exactly. And then there's our voices. We can all be advocates.
So how do we do that effectively?
Well, social media can be a powerful tool.
Yeah, that's true.
We can use it to raise awareness, to share information, to amplify Indigenous voices, to call out injustices.
And even just to connect with those communities.
Absolutely. And we can also contact our elected officials.
Right, make our voices heard at that level.
Advocate for policies that support Indigenous rights and self-determination.
So being an ally means being informed, engaged, and willing to speak up.
It's about taking action, moving beyond just feeling sympathy.
And actively supporting justice and equity for Indigenous communities.
And remember, allyship is a journey.
Yeah, it's not a one-time thing.
It's ongoing. It's about continuous learning, reflecting, and challenging ourselves to do better.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into the life and legacy of Birsa Munda, let's keep in mind that his story isn't just a historical account. It's a call to action.
His fight for justice and equality, it continues today through the efforts of countless individuals and communities around the world.
It does, and his legacy challenges us to be active participants in that fight.
To work towards a world where Indigenous communities have the right to determine their own futures.
And where their voices are heard and respected.
Let's honor his memory by becoming allies in this struggle, by standing up for what's right, and by striving to create a future where the rights and the dignity of all people are respected and protected.
Birsa Munda's story is a powerful reminder that even a single voice can ignite a movement, inspire generations to come. And it's a reminder that even though he's gone, that fight for justice, that deep connection to the land, and that unwavering courage, those continue to resonate with us today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope Birsa Munda's story inspires you to learn more, to engage more deeply, and to become a force for positive change in your own communities.